All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials World podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Zoomers and millennials, we love manga and anime. I think we can all agree it's great. It has no issues. It is good for society. It's just good for everyone. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and you know what it's really good for is the comic book industry at large. It's great for all of the brick and mortar direct market comic book stores that 90% of their stores are manga now. I love it. The other 9% are MCU film adaptations. There's no degenerates that are interested in anime or manga. I love that it's basically influenced every aspect of modern pop culture.
No, I really love that too. And in fact, speaking of something that is not degenerate at all and has influenced modern mass culture, let's just get right into our review for the 2001 infamous gore fest, Ichi the Killer. But before we get into our review here, Brian, it is time for our segment, the Cringe Millennial of the Week. And last
Weak,
time,
weak, weak, weak.
woo! And we did put the air horns in last time, so I'll definitely put it in again.
You love to see it.
We do. And speaking of things we love to see, so speaking of infamous Japanese gore fest in the fiction variety, let's get into the non-fiction variety of it. So our Cringe Millennial of the Week is, of course, my choice for Cringe Millennial of the Week. I found a little bit of a tragic story that really relates quite well to our film that we're reviewing today.
Yeah,
So
and just to be clear, I have no idea. Last week I had given Taylor a little bit of a prepper, but he kind of hinted at me. He kind of dropped some hints to me, but I have no idea what we're going into here.
oh yeah, it's pretty rough. So I'm just going to get right into it. So our cringe millennial of the week is a Japanese man by the name of Tomohiro Kato. Now, if people who are not familiar with Tomohiro Kato, he is the perpetrator of the 2008 Akihabara massacre in Tokyo, Japan. Now, you may think, why are we talking about a mass murderer on an episode where we're reviewing a movie? Well, the movie might have something to do with this. Has a lot of cross-pollination here. But just to give a little brief overview, so Mr. Kato killed 7 people in a van and stabbing spree in the year 2008 in the Akihabara district of Tokyo, Japan. And I want to relate a little bit about this guy to our protagonist of this film, Ichi the Killer. So Kato is a very interesting fellow. He apparently posted messages from his mobile phone to a website called Extreme Exchange Revised, revealing his intentions to commit the attack through his final message 20 minutes before the attack. A police official stated the first message read, quote, "I will kill people in Akihabara," unquote. Other messages he is alleged to have posted include, quote, "If only I had a girlfriend, I wouldn't have quit work," unquote. His next quote is, "I would never become addicted to my mobile phone. Anybody with hope couldn't possibly understand how I feel," unquote. And "I don't have a single friend and I won't in the future. I'll be ignored because I'm ugly. I'm lower than trash because at least the trash gets recycled." So this individual had a very positive outlook on life, like our protagonist of our film coming up.
Are you familiar with the Branson episode 1 poem, I'm Shit? Where he's like, I'm shit. You may feel like shit, but I actually am shit.
Jesus. But yeah, so based on Kato's messages, commenters referred to the incident as another case of Japan's hikikomori becoming more violent and suicidal. So if you don't know what hikikomori is, it's essentially just Japanese neets. That's all it is. It's the extreme version of neets where like people don't leave their rooms for like years at a time.
It's pretty interesting. We won't get into it here, obviously. Some pretty specific cultural links to Japan and their work and family culture. That is interesting if you want to read about it. But yeah, that's the Japanese equivalent of a NEET.
Exactly. So after the van attack, he was sentenced in 2011. He received the death penalty and he was executed on July 26, 2022 at the Tokyo Detention House. Now, you may think, why are we talking about this once again, even though it is related to a movie that we're about to review? Well, he was born in 1982, which made him, at this very moment, because of course he was killed, a millennial. So he is a very cringe millennial. Would you agree, Brian?
This is an extremely millennial specific thing. Like, of course, the first hikikomoris were not millennials, and I'm sure that it's a growing problem, but you saw like an explosion of that specific group with our age group. And this is funny because this is, of course, we've got like Elliot Rogers shit. I guess I've stopped using the word incel because it's so misused these days, but those guys. That certain type of guy that's a mass shooter. What's funny about this is really specific to like Japan's cultural climate. It's a bummer, man. It's not based, I don't think.
No, it's not based. Honestly, it's just really, really fucking sad to have a guy who's just like, I have no friends, so I'm just going to kill people. And then eventually the state kills him. So, very sad story.
And what's the solution to that? I mean, that's obviously easy to say, like, oh, this is like some shitty entitled guy, which like he almost definitely was. Sure, of course. That's how, he's a monster. But like, what's the solution, I guess, to the wider hikikomori problem? To change the the work culture and family culture and the stage of capitalism that Japan is in, that's like highly accelerationist state.
I was going to say state mandated girlfriends, but I think that works too.
I mean, we'll get there. I want to go on record. We are a leftist, socialist, woke podcast, and we leftistly believe in state mandated girlfriends.
Yes, I believe in state mandated girlfriends in the fact that they can be any type of state mandated girlfriend. They can be elderly, they can be like trans mask, they can be any, but they have to be state mandated girlfriends.
Yes, so that's part of our communist manifesto here at Millennials Are Old. You will get a state mandated girlfriend. To all of our incel, Bernie bro fans, listeners, friends, and co-hosts present, but you will not get to choose them. We will decide the appropriate age, body type, and genitals for your state-mandated waifu.
Yes, we're going to make every incel be the plot for Harold and Maude. That's what's going to happen.
That would be a good content. Now, we won't talk about it now. I love that fucking movie.
No, absolutely great movie. But you know what? Speaking of guys who don't fuck, let's get into our review finally for Ichi the Killer. Now, Brian, I know you were very excited to review this when I recommended it. What is your history with Ichi the Killer?
I love it. I saw it twice in high school, rented it from the library. I was going through this phase in kind of, let's say, freshman to junior year, where I discovered that you could order CDs and DVDs as well as books from the library system. And so I would just, anything I read about, I would try to find. And I had read about Ichi the Killer in one of many books about kind of cult films that I was reading around that time. And I was able to order it through my library system. I think when I was 16 years old, just able to pick it up from the library, take it home and watch it. At the time, I remember liking it because I liked edgy shit or whatever, and just being really disturbed by it, but not having much takeaway from it other than that it was really intense and surreal and, yeah, I mean, unsettling, to say the least. So I was really excited to rewatch it because I had a feeling that there was a lot of kind of more nuanced stuff that I was missing, and I was about due for a rewatch anyways. And I think they're both was and wasn't. But no, I love this movie. Love is a weird way to describe it, but it is a great movie.
No, absolutely. And like sort of my history with it. So I think I remember, probably watching this movie around 15, 16, 17, I want to say. And I remember liking it at the time, but yeah, just like you wanting to sort of give it another chance. And I think it also fits in with our, podcast idea in general. Cause like, you were talking about before, right? Like, millennials didn't necessarily popularize anime. Like anime had existed for, decades before then, obviously, but millennials were really the first generation, I think, to really latch on to anime as like no other generation ever had. And now with Zoomers, it's like pretty much ubiquitous. Like pretty much every Zoomer has at least one anime that they're at least aware of or like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you get to Gen Xers and even older millennials, it's still kind of a niche thing. Like the oldest millennials will be able to tell you about having to track down like videotapes from some weird video store and things. But really, when you get to like the very end of millennials, by then it's kind of this big thing and it's blown up. The other thing I was thinking about that ties this into the show is, of course, we've talked about heroic bloodshed as a genre. We've talked about, obviously the raid movies we'll probably talk about in the future. I don't know if we've ever talked about gore before, and I don't know if we will again.
Yes, actually, that was a really good thing that I totally forgot to write down, but absolutely, yes. And I also should clarify earlier when I said millennials were the first generation to really popularize, or I should say like latch on to anime. I also want to add just Asian cinema in general. Like the late 90s and early 2000s was really the just burgeoning of East Asian cinema, making it to like Western audiences. So like, from like 1999 to like 2005, basically South Korean, Japanese films were like very prominent, and a lot of American remakes of Japanese films in particular came out, which I think we can all agree was a pretty embarrassing time.
Yeah, and that probably has a lot to do. Obviously, the most accessible that Asian and specifically East Asian genre films had been, at least since the early 70s, probably in large part due to Rodriguez and Tarantino being big advocates for it. John Woo, of course, made his transition to Hollywood, which we can debate whether or not that worked out.
Well, Face Off is legendary. I think we can all agree on that.
It's fun. I mean, I don't know if I would say it's up to par with like, A Better Tomorrow.
Oh, no,
It's
no,
it's it,
absolutely not. But it is a fantastic action
it's
film.
awesome. Oh yeah, it kicks ass.
But, speaking of things that kick ass, let's just get into the details of Ichi the Killer real quick. So, another reason I wanted to review this film, it came out in 2001. Specifically, it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 14th, 2001. And my very first trivia fact actually comes from this release date. So, Takashi Miike, who is the director of this film, wanted to do a promotion where he brought barf bags to the audience so that they could puke if anything became too gross in this movie. Now, here's the thing, right? Once again, this movie came out 3 days after 9/11. Imagine you're in Canada, because it's in Toronto. If you're an American film critic, you're stuck in Canada because there is no way to get to the US at this point. They have grounded all flights and all travel into the United States. You're stressed out as fuck. 3,000 people just died. And this Japanese man is like, okay, here's this vomit bag for this disgusting movie you have to watch. Like, just such poor taste. It's not even funny.
I'm sure there was a moment where they were like, well, maybe we shouldn't do this now. And then someone was like, we've spent $5 million on all these barf bags. We have to use them.
For a fact, Takashi Miike was like on Tuesday, just several days before his movie, he's like, God, I can't wait till these people watch this movie. And then like, it's like George W. Bush getting told about 9/11. Like some guy's just like, oh, the Twin Towers happened. He's like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely the movie that people were in the mood to see on September 14th, for sure.
Oh, Jesus Christ. And then the next trivia fact I have here, or I should say the next detail I have here, is this film was rated R. Very unsurprising. This is an extremely violent movie.
I would imagine. Do you know if there were lots of cuts?
Actually, yes. So this is actually another trivia fact I had saved, but I'll just say it now because you mentioned it. So in Britain, I believe this film had almost 17 total minutes of cuts. And this film is banned outright in Malaysia and Norway and is banned for distribution in Germany to this day. So this is a very controversial movie.
So this is a very tonally weird movie, I think is also the thing. It's not just the graphic violence, it's how all over the place it is. It's got a very frenetic energy.
No, absolutely. Like, the energy's all over the place. Like, there's some moments that are obviously horrifying, but you almost laugh at them because of just how comically awful they are.
Yeah, and I think that is even more than the literal violence on screen. I think that is what really upset people about it.
Oh, absolutely. I could totally imagine. Like, we'll get into it in the synopsis, but there are some scenes in here that, like, don't even exist in, like, a fucking Hostel or Saw movie. They're just, like, so disgustingly, like, gruesome.
Yeah.
Fucking wild. Oh, Jesus Christ. But yes, as I mentioned earlier, it was directed by Takashi Miike. It is based on the manga of the same name by the manga author Hideo Yamamoto. It was produced by Akiko Funatsu and Dai Miyazaki. Now, we mentioned Takashi Miike. I've seen plenty of Takashi Miike movies. Particularly, I've seen, of course, this movie, Audition, which is also a movie I would love to review one day.
Yeah,
That's
fantastic.
I would say probably
another contender. Oh yeah, I mean I haven't seen all of his movies. I would say I've seen enough. I would say that's almost objectively his best movie.
Oh, for sure. He also directed the movie Itzo, which is a movie that is bizarre. Have you ever seen Itzo, Brian?
No, I have not.
It's about like a Japanese samurai who travels back in time and has to like beat up a bunch of people while like the Japanese Daniel Johnston just plays on his guitar in the background. Like it's a wild movie.
That sounds awesome.
It's really good, genuinely.
Like that sounds really fucking cool.
He also directed the Yakuza video game movie, which I didn't even know there was a Yakuza video game live action movie, but apparently there is.
That must be good.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I love the Yakuza games. I'm actually, literally just before I started recording, I was playing Yakuza 6, so that's how far deep into it I am. He also directed the also infamous Masters of Horror episode Imprint, which is an episode that still has not been aired in the United States to this day. It is on DVD and I've watched it, and it's a lot like this movie and Audition. It's very, very gore heavy. It's very torture filled, but it was good.
I haven't seen that one. I've seen quite a few of the Masters of Horror series. That's interesting because I get the impression from a lot of Masters of Horror that the directors weren't really able to put fully their own stamp on them. Like I've seen like the Joe Dante one. I'd have to go through and see the list. But my impression watching them was always, I don't know, I always felt like they were just handed the script. But it sounds like his episode, it really feels like a Takashi Miike joint.
It does. I have not seen it in a very long time, but I remember watching it. I'm like, yep, this is like Audition and Ichi the Killer. Oh, geez. And then also outside of his directing credits, he was also an actor in the first Hostel movie, which I think he was in the background of one of the torture scenes, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like torturing somebody. There's actually quite a few like famous horror directors in that movie. The director of Cannibal Holocaust is actually shown torturing somebody in that movie too, I remember.
Just a bunch of normal guys. Actually, Takashi Miike seems like a pretty normal guy. He seems pretty well adjusted.
Oh, no, for sure. And also, he was a voice actor in No More Heroes 2 and 3, which I thought was very interesting. Because
I didn't know that. So I straight up was going to ask you if you played No More Heroes when I was watching this, because I was like, oh, yeah, this is like the vibe is kind of similar.
I love Suda51. He's one of my favorite game developers. Yep. I love him.
I have not played No More Heroes 3. As you know, I don't really play video games anymore. I just don't. First two were some of the last video games I was really, really into, actually.
And speaking of masterpieces, he also was a producer on the first Yakuza game, the one that came out in PS2, which is definitely not the best Yakuza game, and I think everybody agrees on that. That's a pretty rough around the edges game. In fact, Lib Hero, Mark Hamill, was the voice of Majima in that game. And of course, we all know Mark Hamill, very unproblematic guy right now. The less said about Mark Hamill, the better, I think.
Yeah.
Incredible voice actor, but just dog shit politics.
I mean, yeah, fuck him. We're done with him. He's the Joker. He's Luke. He's good. He's done his good thing. And I don't hate him, but he can shut the fuck up.
Exactly. And speaking of people who can shut the fuck up, so next detail I have here is Hideo Yamamoto, of course, was once again the manga artist for Ichi the Killer, and this is definitely his most famous work, because I did go through his other works on Wikipedia, and they don't have very long articles on them. So this was, I would assume, probably his most famous work, especially outside of Japan, but I could be wrong about that. And Akiko Funatsu, one of the producers I mentioned earlier, is most known for producing this movie, and this is something I just learned about maybe a month ago. He was one of the producers of the Japanese remake of Cube. There is a Japanese remake of Cube that came out, I think last year.
I'm kind of fascinated by that.
I am too. I have not heard very positive things about the one time a Japanese remake is shittier than an American, or wait, it's a Canadian. Cube was a Canadian, a Western film, but still.
Well, I guess we deserve it after the Old Boy remake.
Oh, no, absolutely. And then the producer, Dai Miyazaki, is actually a musician who currently lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was doing some research on them, so I thought that was very interesting. And he also produced a Japanese movie called Blue Spring, which, fun fact, also came out on the exact same day that Ichi the Killer came out. So I thought that was very interesting. That movie, I think, is probably a little bit more appropriate for post 9/11 than Ichi the Killer, but...
Before we move on for trivia, I just wanted to ask if you came across anything in your research, because I was curious. And then if you have something on later, we can get to it then. Did you find any information about the composer of the soundtrack for this movie?
No, I did not. I saw a little bit of trivia on IMDb, but I did not delve into it. Did you?
No, I looked up their name and I just couldn't find much info, but the soundtrack to this movie is very Japanese. And if you're familiar with Japanese noise rock, this is right up there. It's either these kind of distorted, detuned rockabilly guitars, or just this really frantic kind of steel drumming kind of sounds like a trash can getting the shit kicked out of it. I just thought this is it's very much of a type with bands like Boredoms or Keiji Hino. And I was just oh, I wonder if this is by anyone notable.
I did not see anybody that really, nothing notable in my opinion, but maybe we'll do research after the episode. I'll be oh shit, I know who this person is, but yeah, no.
No, I had the same experience. I was half expecting it to be someone from a band or something, and I didn't find anything.
All right, next detail we have here. So this movie is 128 minutes long. On Wikipedia, it says it's 130 minutes, but every single release I could find, from the Amazon to this DVD to the Blu-ray, all said 128 minutes. So I think that might have just been an error. But either way, this movie is 128 minutes long. And the movie had a budget of about 1.4 million US dollars, and it grossed $80,000, which, yeah, no shit, came out at the worst possible time, and it was banned in 50 countries. Yeah, so very unfortunate, but not particularly surprising.
Unfair.
Very much so.
The true victims of 9/11.
Yeah, it was fucking Ichi the Killer.
This is what they took from us.
Absolutely. And speaking of people that took things from us, so on Rotten Tomatoes, this film has a 65% critic score and an 82% audience score. So I was also very surprised this has a positive rating on Rotten Tomatoes, because this is not a very like critically pandering film. It's a pretty gnarly, gross movie.
Do you think part of that might be because so much time has passed? Like maybe, I mean, it's over 20 years now, so maybe the winds have kind of shifted on that, whereas maybe 5 years after its release, I bet wouldn't have been quite so high.
That's actually a very good point. I did not think about that, but that's probably a little bit of a factor going on there. So I would not be surprised at fucking all. Oh, man. But yes, without further ado, let's finally get into the synopsis. So the film begins with a woman getting horribly beaten and raped. I'm not going to elaborate that any further. That's just literally what happens. A trigger warning to the audience at home. If you don't want to see really awful depictions of sexual assault, don't watch this movie, because it's pretty fucking awful. It's
Pretty
really
graphic. It's rough. When I saw this in high school, I think my big impression of it that I was left with was how extreme the violence was, which it is, and how deeply unpleasant the violence against women is. Because there is fun violence in this movie, but the violence enacted upon the female cast members is unpleasant. It is shot. I mean, it's meant to be.
It's very stark in comparison to the violence.
Stark, yeah. It's very stripped down, and it's very real. It's not like a cinematic type of violence.
Yeah, except for one woman's death, it's basically all that. But yeah, so as this is going on, a man named Ichi, played by the actor Nao Aomori, stands on a balcony masturbating. And the individual who is committing violence against this woman, walks in on, observes him, I should say, jacking off on the balcony. And you just see a big pile of cum on a plant. And we get our intro sequence, which is literally in the pool of jizz that Ichi left over. This is not a joke. This is literally how this movie fucking begins. And my next little trivia fact I have here is actually related to that. So Takashi Miike says that the puddle of cum was actually real.
It looks real. I thought that watching it, I was like, that looks real. When we say that this movie, the tone is weird, this is as good a place as any. That's a great example. So it begins with this very visceral, brutal scene of a woman being beaten and sexually assaulted. That is not, I want to be clear, it's not played for laughs. It's upsetting to see. It's pretty sickening. But then, the title card is shown in a pool of the main character's jizz while watching it. I like the tone of this movie. The mix of cartoonish trauma level, gross out, and just horrific actual violence and splatter with this psychosexual kind of melodrama. I think that's what, more than the actual violence you see, that's what really upset people, was not knowing what to make of that mixture.
No, absolutely. Yeah. We're talking about the tone of this movie. It is, fucking all over the place. One moment is just one of the most harrowing things you'll see in a movie in quite a while. And the next part of it is just so laughably disgusting that it's really something that just takes you in a million different directions tonally. It really does.
Yeah, it's like Looney Tunes.
Yeah, God, seriously. And then speaking of Looney Tunes, so after Ichi flees the scene, sadistic Yakuza boss Anjo is murdered. A cleaning crew run by Gigi, played by the actor Shinya Tsukamoto, removes all traces of Anjo's death and credits Ichi for the murder. Later, Kakihara, played by the actor Tadanobu Asano. Now, we just need to talk about Kakihara real quick. I think we can all agree. Maybe one of the most iconic villains in East Asian cinema, especially modern East Asian cinema.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's on the short list for probably of the new millennium. This is a villain that will be remembered, like Alex from Clockwork Orange, for generations.
Yes, he dresses very snazzily. He's got a bunch of scars all over his fucking face. He's got a Glasgow smile.
He's a pretty boy.
Yeah, he's a pretty boy, but yeah, he's scarred up.
He's like a K-pop guy.
Pretty. Yeah, and he wears these just insanely colorful suits. It's just an incredible
purple
look.
Robes and shit. Yeah,
God, yeah, just a fucking cool looking guy.
I wanted to ask you, rewatching this now, unless this is demonstrably true, rewatching this now, I kind of felt like people might overstate the amount that Heath Ledger was influenced by this performance, though.
Yes, actually, that's a good thing you mentioned that, because I've heard many stories, and I don't think any of them are true, but allegedly Heath Ledger was inspired by Kakihara's character in this movie and his mannerisms and looks.
The performances are so different in my eye.
they're so different. Like, say what you want about the Joker in The Dark Knight, but like, they're not an insanely like sexually complex character, whereas Kakihara is an incredibly sexually complex character. Like, Kakihara in this movie is sadomasochistic and like legitimately sadomasochistic. Like, he's a sadist and he's a masochist.
In the literal psychosexual way.
Exactly. He's also like bi or pansexual, seemingly. Like, the movie says, well, you're not queer and you don't like his balls, but it's like, nah,
he's not straight.
He's definitely not fucking straight.
It's also just like Heath Ledger's Joker, right, is so flamboyant, and like in the way his performances, in his mannerisms, and in the way he speaks. The way that Kakihara speaks is actually pretty mild, which I think is part of why he's scary.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
He's almost kind of soft-spoken.
Yeah, he very much speaks through his actions, not necessarily dialogue. And in fact, well, we'll get into that later, but like, it's very clearly demonstrated that he is like a terrifying figure based on his actions, not on his words. Whereas the Joker, a lot of it's more stated in fucking The Dark Knight. I'll just say that.
Yeah, he gives like soliloquies and shit.
Exactly. But yeah, so Kakihara is Anjo's, once again, sadomasochistic, high-ranking enforcer. He visits the spotless apartment after, of course, Gigi and his crew clean it, and concludes that Anjo fled town with a prostitute and 3 million yen of the clan's money. Kakihara visits an underworld nightclub with other clan members. He tells Anjo's girlfriend, an English-speaking Chinese prostitute named Karen, played by the actress Paul Lynn's son, that Anjo must still be alive, perhaps kidnapped by a rival clan. Gigi feeds Kakihara rumors that Suzuki, a member of the rival Funaki clan, has kidnapped Anjo. Kakihara captures Suzuki and tortures him, but when Suzuki turns out to be innocent, Kakihara, as we mentioned, more actions than spoken. Kakihara slices off the end of his own tongue and offers it to Suzuki's boss as penance. And I want to get into a little bit of this torture scene here, because like, as we mentioned earlier, the scene with the prostitute and her pimp is very horrifying, and this scene is also very horrifying, but the violence is a little bit more Looney Tunes in this. In fact, the little trivia fact I have here is Suzuki's actor Susumu Terajima required 12 hours of makeup and other preparation, and then spent 12 more hours shooting the scene. And just to give a little bit of dressing here, so fucking Suzuki is like held up with chains, like a bunch of them on his back and like arms and shit, like suspended, like probably like 5 feet in the air, just completely naked. And Kakihara just pokes him with like a fucking needle through like the bottom of the chin and through the cheek, and then eventually just pours scalding hot oil all over his body and head. It's gnarly. Like, the idea that this actor had to spend a full 24 hours shooting and preparing for this on top of it makes it more horrifying to me. Like, just all the preparation that went into it. Like, rough.
The violence in this movie, like, I don't think that I was being unfair when I characterized it as guru, or at least borderline guru, which I don't know if you're familiar, is like, the subgenre of anime that is like erotic gore.
Oh, no, I am.
Like,
I am unfortunately.
You're like, I'm very familiar.
I unfortunately have been on 4chan many, many times in the past. Yeah. And I was acquainted with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like there is like a surgical element to the gore in this movie. And this is really the first time you see it. The way that this man's body is being held up by hooks that like perfectly distribute his weight. And you can like see the muscle and sinew being folded up onto these blades. It's really disturbing.
God, yeah, it's genuinely gross. And this is like, I won't say this is the first scene I fast forwarded through, but definitely I was like averting my eyes. I will actually say the first one I averted my eyes at was when Kakihara cuts off his tongue. I'm just like, can't do it.
Yeah. Because again, the violence in here, it's like body horror. It's very about the body. It's about muscle and sinew.
Oh, yeah, it's some fucking rough shit. Like, once again, audience, trigger warning. If you don't want to see violence of every single nature, I would not recommend watching this movie. I mean, I personally love it. I think it's a great fucking genre film, but man, it is a hard fucking watch for people that are not experienced in this kind of movie, I'll be honest.
I mean, it's gross, dude. It's fucking gross.
Fucking gross. Oh, shit. But yeah, so after that horrible torture scene and Kakihara cuts his tongue off, Kakihara and other clan members capture Kano, a drug-addled member of the cleaning crew. Gigi's cleaning crew, I should say. He reveals that although he helped clean up the murder scene, it was Ichi who killed Anjo, and that Kakihara has now been targeted. Later, Ichi returns to the pimp's balcony to watch the thing that happened earlier in the movie. It happens again, but Ichi actually intervenes kind of this time, and the pimp is just like, oh, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you here? And then Ichi starts crying, and the guy's like, wait, why the fuck are you crying? And just starts like kind of beating up on him. And then Ichi, as kind of his main character defining thing, just gets really angry when people say he's crying and just cuts this dude just straight fucking in half in a CG shot that is genuinely hilarious.
Most of the effects in this are practical and most of them are very good. The CG in this, because it's 2001 and they're doing some pretty extreme gore, is like PS2 graphics.
Yeah, it's really funny.
I'm not gonna take point. I think anyone that listens knows, like, I don't really like CG. I'm sick of it, but it's used sparingly, and it seems like they really needed it here.
Yeah, God, really, seriously. But yeah, so he once again kills this prostitute's pimp, and we also see him earlier on. He visits this prostitute at like a hostess bar or something like that, and they exchange sexual favors, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And at this hostess bar, Ichi's like, hey, can I kill your pimp for you? And she goes, yeah, sure, I guess. And then they have sex, and then he takes it a little too literally and kills him.
That scene when Ichi meets the hostess in the bar has one of the most disturbing lines in any film that I've ever heard, which is when he's looking at the hostess who's been severely beaten. Her eye is split, her face is swollen, she's purple all over. The hostess looks at him and says, you're the only one who likes to look at a girl who's all black and blue. And it's just that line, because she's not getting any customers because her pimp is fucking destroying her. Just that line gives me a chill. It's so upsetting.
God, it is. And then speaking of things that are upsetting, so after Ichi kills the pimp, he goes, oh, well, I've come here because now I'm going to beat you up. And she goes, you're going to beat me up? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, oh, Jesus. And then so she hits him with a baseball bat, and then he reflexively kills her with his shoe blades, which is his like signature weapon. He kills people, once again, using a blade in his heels, which is actually based off an earlier scene in the movie. So it's shown in at least two different scenes that Ichi obsessively plays the game Tekken Tag Tournament on the PS2, which is a game I love. And in one of the scenes, he's like asleep, basically like fucking subconsciously like pressing the buttons, while the theme song for Yoshimitsu plays in the background, which is essentially a song that indicates that he is like just like amorphous killing machine, which is essentially what Gigi wants Ichi to be. He doesn't have any like thought. He doesn't have any sort of
he has no autonomy.
No autonomy. He's just a killing machine. And also, he's shown at one point playing as the character Hua-Rong, who is a Taekwondo expert in the game. And that's how he primarily fucking like kills people, is through Taekwondo. So I thought that was very interesting as well. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but I thought it was very hilarious.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, to like get like pointers on how to kill people. He's playing fucking Tekken Tag Tournament.
Me in 2001, a character with a bowl cut who cries a lot and plays too many video games and scares girls. This is like a scary stew for me.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Brian, you mentioned that kind of guy, and I don't think I've ever met anybody like that. It certainly was not me in the year 2010.
Yeah, I never was that guy. I was always normal and good, and I had good relationships and good friendships, and I expressed myself in healthy and open ways.
I was always based, always got laid, and always respected the ladies at 17 years old.
I'm glad that we can share that.
Exactly. So yes, after that, Ichi fights off 3 bullies attacking a boy named Takeshi. Takeshi is the son of Kaneko, played by the actor Hiroyuki Tanaka, and he's also, I believe, a director. So I thought that was very interesting. One of Kakiharu's henchmen. And I also do love this scene because, like, just fucking Ichi is just, like, riding a bike past a bunch of, like, fucking, like, grade schoolers, and he starts getting bullied by these grade schoolers.
He's so fucking weird.
He is really fucking weird. And also, like, that's one of my favorite tropes in any movie is when like a grown adult gets bullied by like grade schoolers. It makes me laugh every time. Like just
well, like I was thinking on my rewatch, I rewatched the second half because it gets so fucking, it does get not convoluted, it just gets weird. So I rewatched the second half when I got home from work. But one of the things that struck me is like, oh, this is the type of person that gets bullied. It's not like a guy that looks super weird or anything. It's a guy who people can sense like can't stick up for himself.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It honestly kind of reminded me, and obviously this movie's not nearly as violent, but it kind of reminded me of in Step Brothers when they get, like, picked on by the grade schoolers.
Because kids can pick that up like no other.
Yeah, God, seriously. Then Gigi incites Ichi to enter an apartment containing several members of the old Anjo clan and murders them all. I love this scene, by the way, because he's like, yeah, screaming and crying. He just like cuts through the fucking lock of the door, and then he like screams into it, and then you see literal like hoses of blood shooting out of the doorway.
Yeah, it's like a comedy beat.
And then like one guy's like cut off CGI face like slides off a wall. It's just ridiculous.
And that's, I think, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think for people seeing this for the first time, especially people like Western audiences who had less context for this, it's like, how are you supposed to take the violence in this? There are these really brutal, obviously unglamorous, and really stark rape scenes. And then there's stuff like this that is like a fucking, like, again, it's like a trauma movie or something. And you've got your audience thinking, how are we supposed to feel about all of this?
Yeah, it's just, oh God, fucking bizarre. Oh God. And later on, Kaneko finds a brothel keeper assaulting Ichi in an alley and rescues him, remembering his own rescue by a member of the Anjo clan years previously. And I like this scene because you can tell, like, Kaneko, so just a little bit of background of Kaneko. He is, once again, the dad of Takeshi, our little child character that Ichi barely intervenes in earlier to, like, stop the bullying. And Kaneko, he's a former cop. He got fired because he lost his gun, and now, basically, to get any kind of income, he joins this just horrifically violent and pretty much broke Yakuza gang. Because, like, they talk about how they don't even have, like, 100 million yen to spare, which is, like, $1 million, by the way. And, like, fucking Kakihara torturing all these people, and they also have a fucking business on the side, and they can't even scrounge $1 million together. That's pretty goddamn bad.
Chump change.
That is real chump change. Like, I don't know if you know, but the largest Yakuza clan in Japan, the Yamaguchi-gumi, is literally the world's largest and wealthiest gang in the world. Like, Japanese organized crime is incredibly lucrative. They make the cartels look like broke bitches. Like, it's crazy.
And any business, anytime that you think about how, like, Western, more famous mafias have dissolved, like, all of that space in the market has been taken up by Eastern gangs.
No, it's absolutely crazy. And in fact, interesting little piece of early video game history, but video games in like the mid to late 80s to early 90s, they had to release their games not on prime like sale days because Yakuza would literally just fucking steal all the shipments and sell them on the black market.
Taylor, we got to start a gang. We got to get in on this somehow.
The FBI is already listening to our podcast, Brian. They already can hear us, so.
Well, at least someone is. Look, I'm already cutting off my pinky just so they know I'm for real.
I cut off my pinky a long time ago just because it turned me on. I'll be honest with you.
It just worked out. It was a happy accident.
But, you know, speaking of torture and happy accidents, so Kakihara enlists the help of corrupt twin police detectives Jiro and Saburo, both played by the actor Suzuki Matsuo, to find a prostitute connected with Ryo Long, a member of Gigi's gang. When Jiro fails to get information from her through torture, which the torture, once again, we talked about how the violence against women is very viscerally awful. I'm not going to get into it. Once again, massive trigger warning. It's pretty bad.
And, you know, listeners will know we like fun violence. I like gore. I like the other violence in this movie. It is unpleasant to see. I think it serves a purpose in the scenes. I don't think it's, I mean, I don't know. I might think it's a little gratuitous at times. It's not good. I don't like watching it. I don't hate the movie for it.
No, I will agree. Once again, to the audience at home, if you're not into these kind of like, you know, torture, gore movies, I would not recommend watching this movie, or at the very least skipping the scenes involving the women. But it's a movie that, you know, I know we do a lot of content warnings on this movie, but I do promise you, if you are a fan of like extreme cinema, you will probably like this movie. But I would not ever recommend this for a normal audience member, I'll be honest.
This isn't a gratuitous movie. Like, this film is, I think everything is art, and that doesn't make something good or bad. But this is an artistic achievement, this movie. This isn't like watching the fucking Vomit Dolls trilogy or whatever the fuck that loser made. Like, this is a very deliberate film.
It is, abso-fucking-lutely. But yeah, so after the twin detectives torture this woman and don't get anything, one of them dresses up like a dog and has like dog ears and starts smelling her vagina, and that's how they track down the pimp. I'm not kidding, that literally happens in this fucking movie. And that's bizarre.
Again, what is the tone of this movie? I think you and I know how we take it. It's this insane movie. But if you're seeing this with no context for it and no familiarity with kind of the tradition it's working in, what are we supposed to think? Is this a dark comedy? Is it this really gritty urban drama?
Just very weird. I'll just say that. And then another weird scene. So after the brothers chase down Long, Kakihara captures him. And this is genuinely a moment that I had totally forgotten was in the movie. So Long tries like just beating up Kakihara. He takes out the piercings on his cheek where his Glasgow smile is. And fucking Long tries punching him just one more time. And Kakihara just starts eating his fist.
This is my favorite scene in the movie.
Eats his fist like a demon.
Yeah. You ever have that friend in like middle school who tried to fit their whole fist in their mouth?
Yeah.
And they did it and then they couldn't get it out? That's what it looks like. And dude pulls his hand out of Kakihara's mouth and it's just stripped down to the bone. It's so fucking gross. It's awesome.
But yeah, so after that, they capture Long for torture. And, we'll just get in a little bit of Long's torture because Kakihara throws his, needles at him. At one point, one of the detectives just fucking, just rips off his arm. Just, nonsense. It's just fucking ridiculous. He's like, you think I could rip off a human arm? He's like, no, I don't think so. And they just rips off his fucking arm. It's just ridiculous.
What's interesting about, movies like this, too, I think of this, I remember thinking this as a kid watching it and then thinking again now, rewatching it, is the violence gets to such an extreme that it almost transcends genres. It's not really horror violence or action violence. It's just sort of like a spectacle.
It's just fucking nuts. But yeah, so meanwhile, Gigi has Karen seduce Ichi by pretending to be the raped woman from his false memory. So there's a lot of context missing from this portion of the synopsis, so I'm just going to go over it real quick. So Karen, once again, the prostitute from earlier, has a very brief fling with Ichi after Kakihara. That's the thing. This movie is very confusing because Kakihara is the most iconic part of this movie, but he's not in any of the promotional materials, so I always think he's the main character, but it's not. It's once again Ichi. Yeah. Ichi is the main character. But so Karen and Kakihara have a very brief fling after Kakihara and Karen rip off a dude's face in a scene that's also kind of hilarious, I'll be honest with you. It's just when they rip off his cheek or whatever, it's just so cartoonish looking that it's just kind of funny. And then, so Kakihara and Karen beats up Kakihara in a kink thing because, as we mentioned, sadomasochistic, he's also an extreme masochist. He just loves getting the shit kicked out of him. And that's also why he's just so interested in finding Anjo, because it's very heavily implied that him and Anjo had a very either explicitly sexual relationship or a psychosexual relationship going on where Anjo,
no one else can do it for him like Anjo.
Exactly. Anjo would just beat the fuck out of Kakihara and just get him just fucking hard all the time. And Karen just doesn't do it for him. And in fact, there's one moment where Karen is beating the shit out of Kakihara where you just hear a clank on the ground. She's beating him with brass knuckles and it's just still not enough for him.
He's talking her through it.
He's like, come on, you put more into it. And he's like, nah, it's not enough for me. As he's spitting out blood, he's like, yeah, it's just not enough for me. And then also we talked about the false memory. So Gigi's whole thing is, and it's expounded a little bit on the OVA that I had on the DVD that we'll get into a little bit after the synopsis. But so Ichi killed his parents at one point, was put in a mental institution, was, I guess, sort of put into the care of Gigi, which I'm not entirely sure how that works in Japan, but I guess whatever, right? And Gigi essentially inoculates him with more ideas about his past because Ichi has the mind of a child, just a submental man. I'll just put it that way. Very emotionally and mentally shallow man. And Gigi's idea is to make him into a cold-blooded killer, is to implant ideas into his brain that he was horrifically bullied as a child and that his one female childhood friend was horrifically raped while he watched. And that's his sole motivation, is to beat up bullies and rapists. Although once again, in his submental mind, he also very much compartmentalizes that into his own kink and loves watching violence against women.
It's all confused, and it's something where, because he's deeply disturbed, all of these memories are kind of tied together with his own sexual inadequacies and sexual confusions. It's pretty disturbing. I'm going to say one more time.
It is very disturbing, but very interesting as well. I'll just say that. And, another bit of context. So I watched the dub first just because I wanted to see. And I want to say this. I'm not a fan of dubs. I think 99% of dubs outside of Funimation are generally awful. But I will say, this is the worst dub I have ever heard in my entire life. I am dead serious. And, the thing is, the DVD that I have is kind of a quasi bootleg. I think it was a fan dub, I want to say. And the dub is so bad that legitimately it makes the film impossible to follow because they miss entire lines of dialogue. It's that bad. It is terrible.
Oh, that's unfortunate because, like, you know, I watch not all the time, but I watch a good amount of like Asian cinema, in particular action cinema, and I can deal with a pretty substandard dub for like a certain type of movie. But this is such a like thematic and a movie that's all about these serious, intense performances that really I don't know why you'd ever watch the dub unless you like absolutely had to. But if you're going to, you really need to work at it because so much of this movie is about the characterization. That's what makes it work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the fact that they just seemingly did not give a fuck. It's just bizarre they even decide to release like a fan dub for this weird DVD release, but whatever, who cares, right? Like, at least the sub is still good.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, so once again, so Karen pretends to be the raped woman from his false memory named Tachibana, and she goes to his apartment, basically tells him all these like things that basically get him off and talk about how like she wants it, just weird stuff I'm not really going to get into, but she starts blowing him, and when Ichi becomes confused by Karen's claims that she desired for him to rape and assault her, he kills her. Now, this is the one scene that is like violence against women that's pretty much played the exact same as the violence against men. Like, he does like a sweep and like cuts off one of her feet, and she's like just like hopping around. It's a little silly, and then he ultimately kills her by slicing her neck, which is how he basically kills almost everybody on screen in this movie with his heels. And that almost is the like end by of accident. Karen. Yeah, exactly.
Like he is, even though he's like he's this killing machine for this gang, Ichi is very ungraceful. He's actually kind of clumsy, and it's sort of like he blunders into killing his targets.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious, to be honest.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But yeah, so after that, Gigi informs Kakihara that Ichi is coming to kill him, but is spotted by Takayama, one of Kakihara's men. After a pursuit of Gigi, who is revealed to be surprisingly strong and muscular, which this scene also made me laugh really hard because I totally forgot it was in the movie. So yeah, a little bit more context. So Gigi's like probably like a middle-aged-ish man, looks pretty short, wears oversized clothes, and you're like, oh, this guy, like whatever, right? And then he takes it off, and it's like a CG just like fucking muscle man on his body. It's just absolutely hilarious.
There are moments in here like this is a very gritty movie. I actually think the psychology stuff, I don't want to say it's smart, but it's pretty complex. You know, it raises some pretty difficult questions, and I think it's pretty thoughtful. But then there's moments like this where they're just like the manga, like roots of it, you're just like, oh, yep, this was a cartoon.
And in fact, actually at one point, so I did a little bit more research. So apparently Gigi in the manga is actually like in his 30s or something, but he's just such like a steroid like gearhead that he just aged himself prematurely to look middle-aged. But in this movie, they just got a middle-aged guy to play him. So I guess that works well enough, I guess.
Lateral change, I guess.
Ichi then arrives at Kakihara's base where he kills Jiro and Saburo, our detectives from earlier. So in our final scene, Kaneko, Kakihara, and Ichi chase each other to a rooftop. Due to Gigi's psychological manipulation, Ichi believes that Kaneko is his brother and confronts him. Now, before we get too much into it, my single favorite scene in the movie is actually the chase up to the rooftop, like the little moments of like slow-mo, and you just see like Kakihara's like fucking multicolored, just fucking like suit just goes into the like, it's great. I love it. It's very artistic to me.
That's a very like heroic bloodshed type like John Woo scene. Because even though I feel like Ichi the Killer does kind of fit in that genre to some extent, it's pretty different from say like Bullet in the Head or something, or like City on Fire. But that scene you're really like, oh, this is like going for that kind of gun fu thing.
No, absolutely. It's just fucking fantastic scene. To anybody at home, just watch like the last 20 minutes of this movie. I guarantee you'll love it. Like, it's just balls to the wall awesomeness. It's just great. But yeah, so then Kaneko shoots Ichi's leg, and Ichi slits Kaneko's throat in front of his son Takeshi. Now, interestingly enough, a little bit of a trivia I have here. So when Kaneko shoots Ichi, those are the only 2 gunshots in the entire movie. Even though everybody has a gun in this movie, that's the only time a gun is ever shot in this movie. So I thought that was very funny.
Well, because there isn't that much surgical gore with guns.
That is actually a very good point. Yeah. Well, you know, talk about surgical violence with guns. When we get to our Hot Couch Guy classic Equilibrium, you might change your mind on that. I'll just say that.
Interesting.
So after that, Takeshi attacks Ichi as he experiences a mental breakdown. Bewildered by Ichi's behavior and perturbed by his screams and cries, Kakihara inserts his skewers into his ears, which this scene's also hilarious. So Kakihara is just like, oh, I guess nobody's left to kill me. I have no danger left. So this fucking bitch won't stop crying. So he just makes himself deaf by stabbing himself in the ear. It's just so fucking ridiculous. And yeah, it's just like, to people may not be paying attention, like, why is he doing it? And it's because fucking Ichi won't stop crying.
Yeah, he can't stand it. This like 30-year-old man just blubbering.
Oh god, he then suddenly sees that Ichi is decapitated Takeshi, and they do show a decapitated child's body. Just bizarre. Ichi then charges at Kakihara, embedding a bladed boot into his forehead. Kakihara falls from the roof to his death, and while he's falling, he's like, oh, this is so great, oh, thank you, Ichi, and then he like dies. However, when Gigi finds Kakihara's body, he has no wound in his head. So my whole theory is that I think after he kills Kaneko and Takeshi starts beating him up, I think like Kakihara is just like, fuck this, I have nothing else to live for. And I think he jumped off and he like hallucinated that like somebody just kicked the shit out of him one last time.
Yeah, and he had this beautiful, glorious, orgasmic death. Yeah.
Instead of just him just killing himself because he just has nothing left to live for.
Yeah, because where's there to go for? He's got no money. His career's gone. The one guy who can get him off, beat him just the right way, is gone.
Yeah. And then in our final scene, years later, Gigi's corpse hangs from a tree in a park. A young man resembling an older Takeshi leaves the park with a group of school children. Now, interestingly enough, to expound a little bit upon the manga, so apparently at the very end of the manga, it's actually shown that Takeshi becomes the new Ichi the Killer. And he actually, instead of having the 1 on the back of him like Ichi does, he has a number 2 on the back of him. So he's literally Ichi's successor.
Because Ichi means 1, right?
Exactly. It literally means the number 1 in Japanese. So I thought that was very hilarious. But yes, so that is our plot synopsis for this fantastic movie. And before we get into our final thoughts, Brian, I really want to get into our Amazon reviews because, oh boy, incredible Amazon reviews. So as I mentioned earlier, I think maybe yesterday or the day before, these reviews are the encapsulation of all of my favorite types of reviews. I found one of each of all of them. So I appreciate that. So
good.
This is just absolutely hilarious.
Good.
So our very first review is from Mel, who gives this film 5 stars. And the head of the review says, me likey. And the body of the review says, me likey. And I also looked on his Amazon profile because I'm like, oh, let me see if he has just as in-depth reviews for anything else. And on 2 different movies, he just gave 1 star and he just said poop. And that's it. I think a toddler. I don't even remember, to be honest. It was a movie I'd never heard of before, so I have no fucking clue. My idea is that this is like a 5-year-old writing these reviews, or like a 3-year-old or something.
Just a depraved 5-year-old that's watching Ichi the Killer going, me likey.
Oh, God. And then speaking of fucking premature and premental toddlers, let's get into our next review here from Emance, who gives us 1 star. And the head of the review says, Blood Pack Edition. Great idea, lousy execution. And the body of the review says, so as I mentioned, the trope. This is the trope of a 1-star review that's not necessarily appropriate for the movie, obviously. But it is appropriate for warning people about the quality of a shit home release, which is a favorite type of review of mine.
Blood Pack Edition. Do you know what that is?
Yes, actually. So let's get into it right here. So in the body of the review, it says, the packaging idea was indeed very creative and, shall I say, colorful, but the execution of the packaging was extremely poor. This was released in 2007, and by the time I got my copy, all the blood had long since dried up, leaving behind a rather unattractive looking piece. That's the first issue. The second one has been discussed here before, but I will reiterate. Both discs are crammed into the pockets in this cheap vinyl blood pack.
Oh.
So removing them is tedious and it's nearly impossible to remove them without marring them. So with that being said, I do recommend this amazing film to fans of foreign cinema, but I would go with the single disc unrated version. It would be nice to see this 2-disc edition released in more conventional packaging so that all may enjoy the extra features and learn more about this great little Japanese film and a solid 4-star film at that. So I did look it up online. The one review of it I found on YouTube was a guy who literally bought it in Milwaukee, so I thought that was hilarious. But the vinyl blood pack, so yeah, it's literally just like just vinyl like packaging that looks like a blood bag, and the 2 DVDs are literally just sandwiched in between 2 different vinyls. It's not even hooked into anything.
My God, this is making me so mad.
Yeah, so not necessarily a good review for this movie, obviously.
But a helpful review.
But a genuinely helpful review, absolutely. So for me, I'm just like, this is absolutely perfect. I will accept it. And this is just a good review altogether because it warns people about this specific shitty release. Oh, God. And then my final trope here. So this is the trope of a review that makes us really angry. And I'm going to end it on that. So...
Oh, joy.
So this is from Tracy Weiss, who gives this film 3 stars. And the head of the review says, I hate movies with an inexplicable ending. And the body of the review says, I enjoyed most of this movie, in parentheses, although I had to look away many times due to the extreme violence. There was a storyline, character development, and even some humor. But the ending was one of those stupid ones where you have to figure out what the hell just happened. I can't stand movies that end this way. Don't make me figure it out. You are the storyteller, so tell the freaking story. Which, by the way, I was confused for all of 5 seconds.
Yeah.
This is not a complex ending. I'm sorry.
No, the movie is just like a succession of scenes.
And when I saw this review, I was spitting. I'm like, you stupid bitch. How do you not understand this?
Even if it wasn't, even if you did have to decipher the ending for yourself, like, okay, maybe that's a matter of preference, but come the fuck on. I don't want to think about it. Like, not for 2 seconds. You just categorically don't like the idea of something being open for interpretation.
God, we're talking about submental. That's a submental understanding of art. Like, this person's a fucking moron. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't like saying that about a lot of people we talk about in the Amazon reviews, but this person's just a fucking idiot. I'm sorry.
Well, like, they probably love how all of the movies that come out, I sound so old now, how a lot of movies that come out now just hold your hand. They tell you exactly what is happening at every moment and how to feel about it.
Yeah, just fucking ridiculous. Like, yeah, okay. You know what? Not all art is fucking straightforward. But if you want to engage in art meaningfully, you should be able to understand that not everything can be figured out immediately.
Yeah, but also, like, there's nothing in this film that is, like, so cryptic.
God, absolutely not. Like, pretty much everything is frankly stated. I would say the most, like, fucking subconscious thing in this movie is Yoshimitsu's theme song from Tekken Tag while he's playing the game. Like, most of it doesn't need to be delved into much more deeply than that.
In fact, I actually had a thought about this during my rewatch day. I think it would have been interesting if they had kind of left it vague as to whether his memories were false or not. Like, I kind of was thinking it would have been cool if they had sort of given you all of the pieces to figure that out, but not told you, so that it was kind of open for interpretation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like,
but no, even that is like the type of thing that if it was a really cryptic, kind of confusing movie, it wouldn't have explained stuff like that to you. But it takes the time to make it all very clear at every point why things are happening.
Yeah, so once again, anybody who doesn't understand the ending of this movie and it takes you longer than 5 seconds to figure it out, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you're going to give it a negative review because of that, then you just shouldn't be engaging with art really beyond, like, fucking Star Wars at all. Like, seriously. I'm sorry. Like, even with that shit dub that basically missed a shit ton of context, even I still understood it.
Yeah, well, it's not hidden. Like, the ending of this movie is not, it's not a hidden thing.
Yeah, like, even when you see Kakihara's body at the very end, like, you figure it out. Like, wait, what? And then you're like, oh, okay, never mind. I get it. Oh, Jesus Christ. But yes, so those are our Amazon reviews. Now, before we get into our final thoughts, once again, I do want to discuss a little bit of the OVA. So you did see the OVA, correct?
No, I'm going to watch it. I was going to, and then I was like, I don't really want to come into the podcast thinking about the OVA. I wanted to just think about the feature. I'm going to watch it tonight just for fun.
Okay, so I'm not going to get into it too much to spoil it. I mean, there's not really much to spoil anyways, but it is a prequel story that I think is pretty good at explaining sort of Ichi's upbringing and events before this movie. It really, like, gets into the, like, the quote-unquote bullying that happened, that Gigi wants Ichi to think happened, etc. It's pretty solid. It's very horny. It is very, very, very horny. I would say maybe even more horny than this movie, and that's saying something. There is a lot of tits. There is not as much gore as I was expecting, but there was a lot of tits in it. A lot of early 2000s, late 90s anime sex scenes. So, you know.
Is there bush?
There was a little bit of bush. Although the tits in it were, for anime tits, were spectacular. I'll just say that. Like, not generally a big fan of anime tits because they look just, I mean, they're literally cartoons.
They're cartoons.
But I will say, the person who drew these legitimately looks like they have at least seen a pair of tits in their life.
They've seen some titties.
So I will give them that. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about anime, and I think this gets into
as opposed to the animators of heavy metal.
Yeah, exactly. But I think this gets into our discussion of our Akihabara Massacre guy and this movie and as well modern anime, right? Like, I think the difference between a lot of 90s and early 2000s anime and like now is that, like, I think it was clear that back in the day, like, people who drew anime were like people who had at least had sex before and like kind of understood how sex worked and understood like maybe the complex like fucking, you know, psychosexual and emotions behind it and stuff like that, which is why like I think a lot of the horniness in like Dragon Ball Z, for example, is like genuinely pretty funny, whereas a lot of the horniness in like modern anime is just really off-putting and weird to me, I'll be honest.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Because a lot of them nowadays are very clearly guys who grew up on not getting laid.
Their sexuality is anime. Like, it's becoming Aurora Boreas. Whereas, like, okay, let's keep going with the Dragon Ball analogy, because that's an anime we're both pretty familiar with.
Oh,
the
yes.
horniness is like, oh, here's some titties. Here's some horniness. It's kind of funny. Isn't it funny how we get all horny sometimes? You know, and you're like, okay, yeah, it's like a funny element. And even actually, like, horny anime, like if you've ever seen the first Vampire Hunter D, which is very horny, you know, it's like, oh, here's a little bit of erotica. It's not like, oh, here's your weird anime where, like, the anime itself is, like, fetishized, you know?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
No, I totally fucking agree with that 100%. Yeah, I mean, like, or also, you know, in Dragon Ball, when they're stealing like Bulma's panties or whatever, it's like, you know, that's just a thing that like dumb like middle schoolers did or whatever. But, you know, nowadays it's like, oh, I'm really into this girl, like, I'm gonna like spy on her, and it's like, this isn't like fun
I'm gonna
sexual.
eat her panties. Yeah,
it's well, like serial killer shit. Like
in Dragon Ball, you know, Goku doesn't even know that he shouldn't. He's just laying on Bulma's crotch because it's comfy.
Yeah. That's actually a really good point. He's just so childlike and innocent. Like, the fact that he ever fucked, like, Chi-Chi in the first place is pretty wild, if you ask me.
She must have walked him through it. I love Dragon Ball so much, dude. I would love to somehow to talk about Dragon Ball on here, but there's just, I can't think of a way to do it that's manageable.
Honestly, maybe reviewing the Broly movie, because that is, like, new metal as fuck, and that would be a great way to introduce, like, yeah, fucking Dragon Ball, like, the millennial shit.
I was gonna say Tree of Might, because I feel like that's a really underrated early one, but I would do Broly.
You know, honestly, yeah, I would absolutely love to watch the Broly movie, Tree of Might. I think basically any 90s DBZ movie would be prime content for the show, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, really, it could be any of them. It would just be an excuse for us to probably just dip our toes into DBZ for a little bit. There's a lot to talk about there, just I think, in terms of the generational thing and old millennials. So really, any way that we get in, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then we can get back into our argument on whether or not the original actress who played Goku in the series is your preferred or not, because I remember that was kind of a point of contention on an earlier episode. You know what, I will say, though, I grew up on the dub. I think Funimation, for the most part, is the company that made pretty universally acclaimed dubs, and I do love them. So I'll give them that. But most other dubs, I would not recommend. I'd rather watch the subtitled anime or foreign film, almost always.
All right, we're not going to relitigate this right now. I think it's just because that's what you saw when you were a kid. That's because that's what was on Toonami. That's what I think.
You are absolutely correct. But you do have to admit, Funimation did a pretty good dub, though, you have to admit.
Yeah, it's fine. I rewatched some of the dub recently, and I was like, yeah, this is fine. There are way worse dubs. If you look at an anime from, like, the late 80s, way worse.
Way worse.
Or the Sailor Moon dub, awful. So much worse than the Dragon Ball dub.
Like, anime is back as far as you can remember. Even, like, Kimba the White Lion, that dub is not very good. It's like a universal fucking thing about anime is that pretty much all the dubs are inferior to the subs, almost always. Like,
dubs have gotten pretty good now.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, where they're fine. They're, you know, pretty good.
Yeah, they're fine to pretty good, or sometimes awful. But at most, they're fine to pretty good. Like, that is the thing. And, you know, speaking of things that are fine to pretty good, maybe, I just learned, I think it was yesterday, that there's actually a prequel live-action movie to Ichi the Killer. I think it's called Zero Ichi, I think it's called, if I'm not mistaken. That came out, I think, like a year after this movie came out. It was never released in America, as far as I'm aware of. It's also much shorter. It's only like 80 minutes long. So I thought that was very interesting.
I saw that just when I was doing a little reading up on the cast and crew of this, just before we recorded, and that came out. And I was like, oh, what's this?
Yeah, and actually as well, they did bring now Omori to play Ichi again. So I thought that was pretty cool. I'm glad they did that.
I mean, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah, abso-fucking-lutely. But yeah, with, I think, a lot of that out of the way, do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables, Brian, or do you have anything else to add?
I would not recommend Ichi the Killer without reservation. This is a movie that is full of extreme violence, and the violence is split between, again, like fun, kind of wild gore, but also just some very realistic and very brutal, unforgiving violence that is not a good time. It switches between the two pretty rapidly, and it mixes some really, really dark humor throughout. The tone can be a little disorienting, and like I said earlier, the violence in this movie is so extreme that that I feel like it transcends normal genres. It's not like action violence that's exciting to see or horror violence that scares you. It's like this next level. It's like you're watching these abominations unfold on screen. Having said that, I think it's a very artistically accomplished movie. The performances are fantastic. I think it has some really interesting questions it raises just about kind of psychology and the way that people's sexuality is all twisted and turned into these really weird tapestries. But I mean, I would not recommend this for a general audience.
No, I absolutely agree with basically everything you said. Like, if you're not a genre person when it comes to like horror or like gore films or just over the top violence films, or if you're a survivor of sexual assault, I would not recommend this movie. But if you're not one of those people, if you like genre films, if you're a movie buff, if you like foreign cinema and you don't fit any of those other categories of people that frankly probably shouldn't watch this movie, I would recommend it. I think if you have the stomach for it, I think this is a very enjoyable, fucking just gnarly horror gore film that I would just recommend to a lot of extreme movie fans. And I mean that extreme and literally, like they love extreme cinema.
You're using extreme in the sense of like when someone would say extreme music rather
exactly
than like,
yes.
Yeah,
that is a good point. Yes.
this is like for fans of like this is like cinematic grindcore or power electronics.
Exactly. Yeah, cinematic grindcore. That's a really good way to put this movie. It really is.
Yeah.
Oh God. But yes, with that out of the way, that is our review of Ichi the Killer. So time to get into our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, you can follow us on Spotify. We are uploading every episode to both YouTube and Spotify at the same time now. Same description, same everything, same pluggables in there. So feel free to subscribe to us both on our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify.
You can follow us both on Facebook. You know, it's just Millennials Are Old. But really, I would advise following on Instagram. It's the same post and everything. It's just the interface is much, much better. Facebook page, I just don't like it. I just don't like looking at the site. I've thought about making a Twitter so that I can talk to people and actually like interact a little bit more, frequently, because that's not really how Instagram is built. But also Twitter's dying, so I'm kind of on the fence about that. And also follow my Instagram, which is just JLo Biafra. But yeah, please follow the Facebook or Instagram pages. If you follow the Facebook pages, please help me find more weird boomer pop culture groups.
No, absolutely. If you can find us a Facebook group that mentions, fucking 60s and 70s Hammer horror films, absolutely. Just refer them to us. We will sub to those groups.
Yeah. Help us find a bunch of groups where a bunch of boomers are speaking fondly but kind of weirdly about, which Raquel Welch scene gave them a sexual awakening under a profile picture of them with their grandkids.
If you can find us a Facebook group that reminisces about all the unintentionally racist disco songs that existed in the 70s, please refer us to those groups. We'll absolutely talk to those people.
And we encourage you to talk to them as well.
Yes, and mention all the time about how racist they are, because we all know Facebook boomers have very nuanced opinions on race.
They understand that racism is a tapestry, that it's systemic, that it isn't a personal criticism of them to point it out, and they will listen to what you say. They are interested in it. They, in fact, understand what racism as a concept is.
Yes, they do, which is why they genuinely believe that only black people can be racist, nobody else. Oh, God, we love Facebook boomers. They're great. And, speaking of people who are not literal Facebook boomers, my final pluggable, I forgot to mention it. Please donate to the Lucifer and the Father Indiegogo, which I believe will still be up by the time I release this episode, but I'm not entirely sure. But if it is, please donate to it. They're a little bit behind on funds at the moment, but I really do want to see the sequel to Lucifer and the Father. Scott and Sean, you guys are based as heck.
Great friends of the show, truly. They're working on a really ambitious, kind of a pretty high concept show. They've done the pilot. We viewed it not for the show. I mean, they're really trying to do something immersive here, and we want to push them across that finish line.
And you know what? With that out of the way, I think it's finally time for us to be cringy as hell and go to bed at a reasonable hour.
Have cringy little dreams.
Abso-fucking-lutely. Like, the world will one day recognize just how smart and cool we are as internet atheists.
And everyone will say, oh, I'm sorry that all the Zoomers will be like, I'm sorry, you were heckin' cool.
Yeah, they'll be like, you know what? You were actually genuinely based. And you know what? God isn't real, okay? He isn't. He's heckin' not real.
Well, when are we going to talk about Puritans? We got to figure out. I think I know when we will. I think I've got it lined up. That's been on the docket for a while.
And speaking of Puritans, we're going to be pure adults and go to bed at a good time. So have a good night, everybody.